Hi, everybody. All right. Hi, hello. Welcome today. My name is Christina Tobin. I'm the chair of StopTop2.org, founder and chair of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, Free and Equal Inc., board member of Coalitions for Free and Open Elections, and board member of Californians for Electoral Reform, and a Libertarian candidate for Secretary of State. I want to thank you for coming today. We're having a press conference today uniting all 6 qualified parties across the political spectrum against Top 2 primary, which is Proposition 14 here in California. What Proposition 14 means: only the top 2 vote getters in the primary advance to the general election. This press conference is here. Everybody standing behind me from all qualified parties are against Proposition 14, and we will go into detail as to why. Our speakers include: first speaker from the Peace and Freedom Party, Deborah Reiger, candidate for Secretary, candidate for State Treasurer, C.T. Weber, candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Our second speakers from the American Independent Party will be Markham Robinson, who is the National Vice Chairman, State Chairman, and gubernatorial candidate. Third will be from the Green Party, Chris Vellucci, who is the Green Party Press Secretary, and Hank Chaput, who is a founder of the Green Party. Number 4 will be Richard Winger, Libertarian and of Ballot Access News, the editor of Ballot Access News, and myself, Christina Tobin. Number 5 will be the Democratic Party, Anna Melander, who is the chair of the Sacramento County of the Democratic Party. And finally, we will finish this press conference with Tom Del Picaro, the Republican Party Vice Chairman. So our first speaker will be Deborah Reiger, candidate for State Treasurer from the Peace and Freedom Party. Thank you.
We're going to have CT go.
My name is not Deborah Reiger, it's C.T. Weber, candidate for Lieutenant Governor. One of the things I want to focus on is the general election, because all the focus so far has been on the primary. If Proposition 14 were to pass, it would dramatically change the way general elections are held. It would limit voters' choices in the general election to only 2. General elections are more important. Actually, they are much more important than primary elections, because the general elections are where the final decisions are made on who gets elected. In addition, general elections are much larger elections as to the number of people who turn out and vote. So, why would anyone support Proposition 14? That proponents claim may improve, if indeed you think it is an improvement, the smaller, less significant primary election, when in reality it reduces voters' choices in the much larger, much more important general election. Proposition 14 would also reduce voters' choices from 6 candidates, sometimes 7 when an independent candidate also qualifies, who now can be qualified in the general election to only 2. Independent candidates would no longer be allowed to qualify for the much larger, much more important general election ballot. It would be highly unlikely that the candidate of a smaller party would make the much larger, much more important general election ballot. Write-in votes in the general election would no longer be counted. Don't limit your choices in the much larger, much more important general election. On June 8th, vote no on Proposition 14.
Thank you. I'm Deborah Reiger, running for State Treasurer with Peace and Freedom Party. I appreciate being here. I will make a couple of quick comments. And one is that you will often hear that passing Prop 14 will lead to a bigger number of moderate people in office, moderate candidates, moderate people in office. I'd like to question whether that's really what Californians want. Our country was based and started because there are people that wanted to not be the moderate people that were doing whatever England told them to do. We need people who think differently. We need people with new ideas. And that's why I am opposed to Prop 14. We need the outliers. We do not need many flavors of vanilla. We need all of the options, and we need thinkers that will help us make change. I think everyone knows we need change in this state. More moderates won't bring us change, in my opinion. Please vote no on Prop 14. Thank you.
I'm Markin Robinson, chairman of the American Independent Party and a candidate for governor. The American Independent Party supports the maximum number of choices for voters. However, we do not believe that Proposition 14 will actually have the effect of increasing those choices. With current registration figures, 3 of our current 6 ballot qualified parties will lose that status. The American Independent Party wants you to remember just who put Proposition 14 on the ballot. The legislature. The same legislature that brought you debt increasing as far as the eye can see, and whose primary concern is not your well-being, but the preservation of their own tightly guarded elective offices. Citizens of California, do you trust your legislature? Well, neither do I, and neither does the American Independent Party. There are 4 other major points that voters should take into consideration about Proposition 14. 1, the circumstances of the passage of Proposition 14 and its enabling legislation, Senate Bill 6. It was passed in the dead of night. It was passed as a political bribe to hold out vote against the budget. It was not a principled, well thought out piece of legislation. It was a vote of mere expedience. 2, it was bipartisan. It was evidently not seen by the members of the state legislature who voted for it as a threat to their precious offices. And yet, here are their parties and all the other parties appearing in opposition to it. 3, Proposition 14, like so many others proposed as voters, is simply too long, too complex, and too uncertain in its effects to be a good proposal. 4, not only are voters asked to approve what is too long, too complex, and too uncertain in its effects, but also what is not revealed. The implementing legislation, Senate Bill 6, which contains all Proposition 14's devilish details, is not even printed in the voter's guide. The technical term for this is buying a pig in a poke. Don't do it. Finally, if the voters should decide in favor of Proposition 14, the American Independent Party pledges its all-out efforts to mitigate Proposition 14's bad effects and to strive to preserve the ballot-qualified status of all California political parties who currently enjoy that status. Thank you.
My name is Chris Vellucci. I'm with the Green Party of California. Just have some very short comments. Basically, as was already mentioned, this proposition limits choices for voters. This comes at a time when voters want more choices, certainly different choices. So this proposition would appear to be the exact opposite of what voters really need and what they really want. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hank Chapeau. I'm a Green Party of California archivist, and I've run for public office 3 times in the system that we're looking at demolishing. The Greens have about 40, perhaps more, elected officials in the state of California. You might consider that a farm team. We have to be better than most politicians. Once we get in office, we're under much higher scrutiny than many of the people that hold office. However, we're trapped by the nonpartisan, partisan nature of California politics. This does nothing to help us get beyond that ceiling. Our candidates are stuck. You've noticed more than one of our people have had to leave their party because their political futures are stymied by the rules. Proposition 14 is, will completely eliminate the Green Party. And then there's one argument that they're making about how, the Greens might be able to come in second in San Francisco. We will not be ghettoized to 1 county or 2 counties in the state of California. We want to run all out. We want to run in a fair campaign. And I don't want an electoral system that picks the type of candidate that they want, the so-called moderates, coming out of the election. Elections are about opportunity going in, not the outcomes. Thank you.
I am Richard Winger. There's one very nasty, tiny part of Prop 14 that the press has not really publicized. Under the existing law, there are 2 ways for a ballot qualified party to remain on the ballot. There's a somewhat easy method and a much more difficult method. The easy method is to poll 2% of the vote for any statewide race in a midterm year. The harder test it's an alternate test, is to have about 100,000 registrations. Because parties don't have nominees under Prop 14, the 2% vote test vanishes. And there was another top 2 measure in the ballot in 2004, and the people who wrote that noticed that problem. And their intent was not to throw any ballot qualified party off the ballot. So they lowered the registration test from 1% to 1/3 of 1%. All the people who wrote Prop 14 had to do was copy that. But they didn't. They deliberately changed it. And I debated one of the attorneys who wrote Prop 14, and I asked him, why did you guys do that? And he said, I'm not going to tell you. And then he laughed and he said, ask me after Election Day, then I'll tell you.
I'm Christina Tobin, a Libertarian candidate for Secretary of State, and really have to look at the root of where something comes from. It was a Maldonado, Arnold Schwarzenegger backroom budget deal last February, no legislative hearings, and put on the ballot wrongfully. Maldonado wants to win again, it'll help him out. And Arnold Schwarzenegger with all-time low of a 23% approval rating, well, one can only wonder why. Putting things like Proposition 14 on the ballot definitely emphasizes that. One thing Richard Winger forgot to mention is it doesn't even count write-in votes. So essentially, Arnold Schwarzenegger on the 18th and 24th is holding a fundraiser, of which one will be down in LA, another one will be in San Francisco on the 24th. The Free and Equal Elections Foundation, along with all qualified parties here in California, are planning on protesting both of those fundraisers. So do hope to create a lot of exposure and create a lot of awareness to the people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anna Molander, and I'm chair of the Sacramento County Democratic Party. I'm here today joining my counterparts from across the political spectrum because while we may not agree on a lot of issues, we do agree on this one. Proposition 14 will limit voter choice for the majority of Californians. Whether you're an independent, Republican, Libertarian, Democrat, or Green Party member, you will ultimately see your choices reduced in the general election. Because only the top 2 vote getters in their primary will advance to the general election. Voters in some areas will be forced to choose between 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. Democratic voters may be faced with the choice of voting for a Republican or not voting at all. And the same would apply to Republicans in certain districts. Proposition 14 was put on the ballot as part of a backroom deal, without adequate vetting or consideration for the negative impact it will have on both large and small parties in California. This is not the way to increase voter choice in California. I stand here with Californians of all political persuasions and urge a no vote on Proposition 14 this June. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Del Beccaro. I'm Vice Chairman of the California Republican Party. I want to thank you all for spending your day with us here. I cannot be more emphatic in my opposition to 14 and frankly our party's opposition to 14. I think it's amazing that we're all standing here today and none of us here think Sacramento is working perfectly so it's beyond being modified. But let's be clear, there is a problem. But just because there's a problem doesn't mean you attempt willy-nilly to change it without any evidence that the system you want to put in place will actually fix it. The facts are in Washington and Louisiana. They put in a Prop 2 system. It had no impact like they're saying it would here in California. That's why today I'm calling on the Prop 14 campaign to take down and stop putting forth their misleading radio ads. They point blank say this will increase voter participation. There's no evidence that it can increase voter participation in Washington. In fact, the evidence is directly opposite. They say it'll bring more reasonable-minded people to Sacramento. There's no evidence in Washington that it changed that at all. In fact, when it was tried in Washington, the number of incumbents that were reelected went up. So, if you look at their 2 main claims, that it will increase voter participation. The people here will tell you, in fact, that it won't. And in Washington, third-party candidates dropped from 45 to 12. That's not increasing participation, that's decreasing it. So their main 2 points, increasing voter participation is false, there's no evidence for that, or that it will bring a different type of candidate. That's false. Where it's been tried, it's increased the number of incumbents that have been elected. So, I'm here to say that we do not junk people's rights. We do not throw away the rights of candidates to be heard or parties to be heard without a compelling reason and proof that the alternative system will actually work. In this case, the proof is that the alternative system shuts them out and doesn't achieve the goal that the people at Prop 14 said. In my view, this is classic government at work. See a problem, institutionalize it, and then make it worse. I'll say that again. See a problem, institutionalize it, and make it worse. Prop 14 will not help Californians, it will destroy people's rights, and the party is foursquare against it. Thank you very much. And we'll either have a roundup right here where she'll conclude, and then we'll have any questions. Thank you.
If you would like to have more information, first of all, I want to thank you all of our guests from all 6 qualified parties in California uniting today against Proposition 14. If you would like to see the proponents, for example, where they're getting their money from, millions of dollars from health insurance corporations, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Maldonado team, check out our website, Stop Top 2, that's Stop, TOP-TWO.org for more information. If you'd like to see what true electoral reform is, not Top 2, but implementing instant runoff voting, proportional representation, for more information, again, please visit Stop Top 2, TOP-TWO.org. Thank you for your time today.
Are you all going to answer questions?
Sure.
Yes,
Great.
and of course, to be open to questions, my apologies, please go ahead.
May I ask a question? With the exception of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the American Independent Party, the other parties up here represented, none of you allow declined state voters to participate in your primary. They're the fastest growing group of voters in California. Why not? Yeah, I need you at the microphone too.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Sure.
sorry.
Answer that, please.
The Arizona Libertarian Party went to court to keep independents out of its primary. That may sound selfish, but it was perfectly rational. There were 2 competing Arizona Libertarian candidates for governor, and they were very different. And they had enough money so that they could mail to every registered Libertarian in Arizona because they wanted the voters in the primary to know what they were doing. I hate to say it, but the mainstream press generally does not cover minor party candidates in contested primaries. If the 2 candidates had been forced to mail literature to all the hundreds of thousands of registered independents in Arizona, they just couldn't have done it. And one more example, in Alaska, there was a contested Libertarian primary for governor in 1986. One of the 2 candidates was got in legal trouble. She fled the state, but nobody knew it. And so, because Alaska had a blanket primary, and she was a woman, and women do have an advantage when voters don't know anything else about the candidates, she got the nomination, even though the other candidate was the state chair, and he was there to campaign. So it's sad, but if you don't limit the primary to people who know, to the voters who know what they're doing, it makes a mess. And it's not true that independents are the fastest growing segment of the state. They declined this year. In the January tally, they were at 20.4%. In the brand new April tally, it was 20.1%.
I'd also like to say
Could you
that
do it from the microphone? Sorry. Do you mind?
Yeah.
It's radio. I'm trying to record, so thanks.
Okay, I'd also like to say that from our point of view, the purpose of a primary election is for each political party to decide who's going to represent it in the general election. We can't do that if we're overwhelmed by other people, and that's why we prefer to have our own primary.
And sir, you were going to comment from the Green Party, or no? Or all of you can. It's fine with me.
The American Independent Party specifically decided, for the same reason that they did in Arizona, to limit participation just to American Independent Party voters. We actually have quite a number of contested races, and this will lessen by about a factor of 10 the expense of reaching those who have a choice in that primary.
Yeah, the Green Party also has this rule, and we want our voters to make an affirmative step to join the party. We're also very nervous about being rated. If we have a candidate that's working his way up in the polls, there's a real possibility that somebody could just organize a bunch of declined to state voters to go in there and vote for a lesser candidate, and that could be bought and paid for by people that are opposing Green candidates.
I asked the question, maybe you could stay if you wouldn't mind, sir. I asked the question simply because a lot of voters are saying they are disenchanted with parties. You may disagree with the polls, but the polls seem to say people don't like partisan politics. And yet, declined to state voters don't have a voice in the June primary, unless they know that they have it with the major parties. And if you could use a California example this time, not Arizona, with all due respect, that doesn't help me much.
Now, I want to make a general statement about the value of political parties. I read a fascinating book recently that said that during the Civil War, the North and the South had almost identical constitutions. But there was one big difference in their election system. The North had partisan elections, and the South had nonpartisan elections. Now, you might think that was a problem for Lincoln, that he had a big, active Democratic Party fighting every step of the way. They didn't want to keep the war going. They wanted to make peace. But historical analysis showed that parties helped the North. They helped to organize the government. They helped to make it more coherent. The South, every politician being nonpartisan was just for himself, and it was an interesting thought. And also I want to say, in every country in the world with a population greater than 10,000, people have organized themselves into parties. Government needs parties. We may hate them sometimes, but we need them.
I would just like to add to that, and that is that the whole party structure, came about because of a need. And the polls, I don't think, show that people are opposed to parties per se. They're opposed to Democrats and Republicans, and they say they would like, a majority say they would like to have a third party. So that doesn't mean that they're against parties, it just means they're against specific parties.
Next question.
What about you're saying, I know some arguments have been made that this will just put more emphasis on the primary, where people will sort it out, that they'll be more apt to be active in primaries than they would, before. How would you respond to that? And that, then they filter it out, and then there's the two left.
Okay, again, Tom Noblecaro, Vice Chairman of the California Republican Party. In Washington, the data is exactly opposite. The primary participation dropped because for a variety of reasons. So, again, they are asking Californians to completely change the manner in which they elect people, yet they have no data that shows that their assertions will work. So we are asked to just simply hope that it works out. But when it comes to voting rights, I don't want hope. I want data that shows that it actually works. They don't have that data. That's why they're into platitudes, not into data. So from our perspective, we're not going to change the system simply hoping. Point number one, they don't have that data. Point number two, in fact, parties, Democrat and Republican, will take a far greater role in choosing candidates prior to the primary, at least the ones that we would like to prefer, than they do now. So for instance, at this point, the Democrats have 6 attorney general candidates. Now, we only have 3 or 4, right? We have a chance to have, under the top 2 system, two Republicans on the ballot and no Democrats. What this is going to result in is party bosses deciding, oh no, you can't have multiplicity of candidates because you could cost us a statewide race. So we are going to decide who the Democrat is that will run, so that perhaps the Republicans will have 2 candidates or 3, we'll put up 2, and we'll have the top 2. So, in truth, not only does this empirically result in Washington in less voter turnout, but it's going to accentuate that because party bosses are going to be the ones deciding which candidates get involved. That's an astonishing result that they are pushing for. And in fact, like I said earlier, it's a typical government thing. See a problem, institutionalize it, make it worse. But you'll actually have less voter participation. Remember this critical fact. It is accepted that gerrymandering results in less voter participation. Well, why? Because gerrymandering is about less voter choice. You don't have a real choice. Studies show that up to a third of the state elections now will be between 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. A different form of gerrymandering. So again, their basic claim, more people will participate. The system they're setting up will result in less people participating. So again, their claims are false, and I think they should take down the radio ads and quit misleading Californians into giving up their rights.
Can I just follow up real quick? Will you run something, ads, or I know you're out here speaking, but I mean something paid to counter those ads?
Well,
Do you have the money to do it?
We are pleased that fundraising is now starting on our side, but we have been on the internet and talk radio for the better part of a month and a half, and the initial poll on this showed that 70% of the people were open to this. That has now dropped to 50% when they're starting to take a closer look. So I am grateful for the amount of donations so far. I hope we get more, but this is certainly a grassroots effort compared to a big money effort.
And may I respond to that as well? Responding on behalf of the StopTop2.org committee, yes, we just set it up less than a week ago, so we are currently feeling confident in raising funds not only in California. This does affect people nationwide. If this were to pass in California during the June 8th primary, it would spiral across the nation and ultimately be not only the biggest threat to third parties and independents, but essentially the two-party system would become really one. So in any case, we do anticipate receiving funds in the near future. StopTop2.org.
So I wonder if we wanted to increase voter turnout, if that was the intention originally of this initiative, to increase voter turnout in California, wouldn't the obvious thing be to open primary elections in this state to decline to state voters so that you immediately increase voter turnout for those independent voters?
There's no data that suggests that actually happens. Look, there is reform in the works. The recent passage of Prop 11, which will reform the districts, is a step in the right direction. But again, the central issue here is they want to radically overhaul the system. But they have absolutely no data to back up that says that the medicine won't make it worse. That's what the data shows. They're just hoping it works out better. So I'm not going to trample on people's rights or suggest to Californians, why don't you just change everything? And I don't have any data that says it will. Actually, the data says it won't. But hey, let's just take a run at it. That is not leadership, and that is not wisdom. That's just taking a flyer.
There are other ideas that they could have passed that would do that. In fact, 21 states have a true open primary. They're constitutional, they're popular. A true open primary means they abolish the whole idea of voters being a registered member of a party. The voter form doesn't ask the question. So every voter shows up at the primary polling place. The voter is free to choose any party's primary ballot. But every party has its own primary ballot and its own nominees. There's no sensible reason why the proponents didn't do that instead. In fact, I mentioned that to former Assemblyman Fred Keeley, and he said, yeah, I like that. That's for me. But the reason we couldn't bring up these ideas is, as the others have mentioned, this bill was created at 3 a.m. by taking another old bill on toxic waste. They took that out, put in this stuff. It was all passed in 3 hours. Nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody testified. The process is horrible.
Now, I'm just going to add or respond to that, in that there are a number of parties here in California because you have voters who don't like the two parties that run California. What this is going to do is guarantee that the only two parties will be the parties that voters, or at least a number of voters, say that are Peace and Freedom or Green or American Independent. It's going to guarantee that they're going to be forced to vote for the parties that they didn't like in the first place. So I think that just kind of follows that those people will have no one to vote for in the general election. I mean, I won't. I mean, generally, I don't like Democratic or Republican candidates, generally. That's why I'm a member of the Green Party. So I'm not gonna, I have no one to vote for at the general election.
What do we do to get more
Can I add
equal
to-
footing for these, third parties, the independent parties? What do we do then to get more equal footing for them to be able to compete against the endless money machines of the two majors?
You know, I think all the smaller parties in California agree that, you know, most democracies in the world have a system called proportional representation. And that is where the parties are represented in direct proportion to the number of votes they get in the general election. Now that's a way of opening up the system and having all parties being a participant. That's what we support, at least the smaller parties, and it would open up the system. And it's a real reform. They're talking about it in England now because of the rise of the Liberal Democrats.
Well, I think the answer is also, first, do no harm. This system, categorically, in Washington, they went from 45 candidates down to 12
In the primary.
in the primary. Why? Because they knew they couldn't make it to November. And if you don't have a candidate to root for, you're going to vote less. An important dynamic for people to understand is there is a slow migration out of the San Francisco Bay Area and the LA Basin of right-of-center voters east. So in LA Basin, populating what, Riverside and San Bernardino, in the San Francisco Bay Area, moving generally east. Why is that? Because people are associative beings. They like to hang out with others like them. So already, LA and San Francisco are getting deeper blue. Now, if you're a Republican in either one of those two places, under this system, by and large, there'll be enclaves, or ghettos as he referred to. By and large, you'll have no Republican to vote for Assembly or Senate. So you're going to do two things, likely. Not vote, or move. So this is going to create deeper blue in LA, deeper blue in San Francisco, deeper red in the Central Valley, and you'll get the opposite of what they wanted. So first, do no harm and give these people a chance at the ballot box.
Real quickly. You ask about how can we increase voter turnout and democracy in the state. There's a bunch of things they could think about. 2 days for election day, same-day voter registration. Petition requirements could be lowered. People could be... when?
All mail voting also increases turnout.
Yeah, mail voting. So there's a number and proportional representation. We're going to start with instant runoff voting in a number of Bay Area cities now. All of those lower the bar to participation, especially the same-day voter registration, where you walk in, show your identification, and you're a voter.
Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to add that adjusting how campaign funding is done would make a very big difference. Right now, there's always a money primary before there is a real primary. And the only way even Republicans and Democrats get to run their candidates with a good chance of getting to the November election is by having very big money ahead of time. We also need to have equal media access for third-party candidates. I know in Sacramento the media is fairly good about it. I know in some communities they aren't. There used to be an equal access, equal media time law, and I think it ended in the 90s on the national front. We need to have a chance to have improved campaign financing laws so there isn't a real money primary that eliminates people like Dennis Kucinich, who is an excellent Democrat candidate. When he wasn't winning the money primary, he got knocked out of the running. Prematurely, maybe, because a lot of people would have voted for him. To keep many, many Republicans and Democrats, as well as all of my brothers and sisters here in third parties, we can't run if there aren't fair rules to give us media access. At the same time a Democrat or a Republican is interviewed, I believe the other 4 candidates in that race should be interviewed between now and November, and California just isn't doing that right now. Thank you.
The American Independent Party has an entirely different proposal. Now, we'll not detail it now. They'll have its own press conference called the California Caucus.
And I wanted to finish off also, and then finishing with the question, but top two is it's not going to be increase that is voter turnout. What it is Louisiana-style politics, Washington State. I mean, Richard Winger's taught me Louisiana from 1978 to 2006. All those years, no incumbents were knocked out of office. They dropped it 2008. 5 were knocked out of office. And in Washington State, for the first time since Washington's been a state since I believe 1887. In any case, no third party or independent candidate advanced the general election. Only one candidate was knocked off the ballot because he ran an unethical race. What's going to increase voter turnout? Yes, proportional representation. Yes, all-mail voting. Yes, improving the integrity of the electoral system by having open source, like New York Sequoia's voting machines, but also improving ballot access laws so individuals can run for office at all different levels and have more candidates for people like you and I that they believe in and that they can vote in. So, vote for it. Any other questions?
Could some of you hang around for one-on-one?
Sure.
Can I just ask one more question? On the local level, there are nonpartisan races. Have they been detrimental to the third parties? I mean, I know the folks from the Green Party say they have green elected officials, but they haven't necessarily run as Greens, have they?
We all want to talk about it.
Okay.
No, most of our candidates run as Greens. They get their party endorsement from their county councils, we call our central committees. Then the fun starts because they start getting targeted as being a Green candidate. But very few Green candidates run under the radar. They're out Greens, and we have the mayor of Richmond. There's city council majorities in Marin County.
But they're elected in nonpartisan elections.
They're elected in nonpartisan elections, but you know which party people are representing. When there's a race for mayor in San Francisco, you know who the Democrat is, who the Republican is, and you know who the Green is because they put it on all their literature, and all their literatures, you know, it says endorsed by the Green Party or some leader.
But that hasn't hurt your party, sir. If I have to just, it's a Green question first.
No, it hasn't hurt us in the nonpartisan field, but there's, I call it the partisan ceiling. We get to the point where you say, if I had served, I haven't, but if I had served on a city council or a county board of supervisors, and then, hey, I want to run for the assembly, we're completely locked out of that. Even before Prop 14. I mean, we've had one person in the assembly, which was Richard would probably have to explain it. It was an open primary, but each party's candidate went forward to the general instead of this one, which is 0 parties. Your party label doesn't matter, really. It's only the top 2 vote getters.
So what locks you out, though, of the assembly race?
I want to talk about that. Is that okay?
Well, I could just say money, access to the media. There's a number of reasons that we run into the partisan barrier.
You also got to remember, it's one thing to run for city council. It's a whole different thing to run a statewide race or an assembly race because that's where more money is involved. And so to say that the reason why the Green Party won't have a chance at a statewide candidate, and eventually will lose their presidential candidate, as Richard will explain, is because they can't compete at the statewide level. And for all those who want to say, or the Republicans or the Democrats may not care about, look, the Republicans were a third party at one time. Abraham Lincoln doesn't bolt the Republicans under Prop 2 because he never would have made it any farther than he did. And it forces people into the 2 parties. So in one regard, it's cutting down choice. But you can't say that because a Green is successful in a small town, that somehow that same dynamic translates successfully to an expensive assembly race. It is not a math. It is exponentially more difficult and takes exponentially more money and makes it more difficult to do that.
We have an actual experiment. We had the blanket primary in 1998 and 2000. Tom Tryon is the longest-serving county supervisor in Calaveras County history. He was elected in 1984. He's always been a registered libertarian. Everybody in Calaveras County knows he's a registered libertarian. They really like him. But when he ran for partisan office in the blanket primary, which people would say, oh, that's good, that'll give him a chance. Even in Calaveras County, he ran twice in the blanket primary years. Once for state senate. He came in 3rd in the blanket primary. And then he ran for, I think it was controller in 1998. Again, even in his home county, he came in 3rd. The evidence shows that even people who are popular, known, loved, cannot succeed in the system because these partisan offices are they're partisan bodies. and the voters think, I may like Tom, but I really care about whether the Democrats or Republicans control the state, so it doesn't work.
The American Independent Party has an entirely different view. We feel that there is no reason whatsoever for there to be a distinction between partisan and nonpartisan races. What we need is truth in labeling. There should be a right of any candidate to truthfully claim the endorsement of any free political association.
Well, let's face it, the districts are gerrymandered to be either a Democratic Party district or a Republican Party district in 93% of the districts in the whole country. With that gerrymander, we've created one-party safe districts. So you either have to be a Democrat or Republican. Now, I've run for several union offices and been elected many times. Without a party label, you can tell people you're Peace and Freedom Party, but those people, thousands of people that are voting, you can't say all thousands of those know I'm Peace and Freedom Party. You just know that you won, and you're Peace and Freedom Party. When you have the label on the ballot, people know instinctively who that district is for. And a third-party candidate in this gerrymandered area, using the single-member district where a plurality can win, third parties aren't going to make it. We have to change the election to make them really fair. And this Prop 14 does not do that.
Okay, any more questions?
We seem to keep dancing around the money issue, although we've addressed it primarily in that there is a lot of money behind this. Why is there a lot of money behind this? Why are large corporations, insurance industries backing this? What is their motivation?
Would you like to? Well, can I answer it first then?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, honest opinion, the reason why those corporations and whatnot are behind it is what I've seen, speaking in front of the Santa Clara Chamber of Commerce. I actually spoke out against Proposition 14. They opposed it. And you had an individual from Silicon Valley who represented different groups, from Hewlett Packard to Google, just a real diverse, to the health insurance, KAHU, I believe it's called, California. If you look in one of their editorials last September, the reason why they've given over $500,000, it states specifically in their article, is that they want to help the moderate candidates and, what is it, get rid of anti-single-payer legislature.
Pro,
that is. So that's really the rationale behind it. The proponents such as Maldonado, as I specifically said before, the Latino vote, if Top 2 passes, it strengthens his ability to get reelected. It's a selfish endeavor. And then you have Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've learned a lot about committees setting one up. This is all new to me, but where does this money go after? So it puts more money in their war chest. It's more greed. It's him trying to be Mr. Reformer when in fact it's a bit too late for that, for Arnold to even think that that would even be a possibility. But those are some of the components as to why corporations, health insurance are behind this. And you do see a lot of the public sector uniting with the private sector, and that is very unusual and odd, and something that I hope a lot of you do some research on as well. So, please.
The reason why money plays such a great role in politics is astoundingly simple. The districts are much too large. When our country began, immediately after its Constitution was approved, there were 12 amendments proposed to the states, not the 10 that were actually approved at the time. The first one limited to a very small size, the size of a congressional district. That's the only way you can know your representative. That's the only way it doesn't take an arm and a leg's worth of money, or else we have to give into state funding and state control. And with state funding comes state control, and we're adamantly opposed to that.
Do you have any other questions from reporters? Okay, so I think we are done. Thank you very much. Again, StopTop2.org, and thank you for your time. Thank you all.
Yeah, with the exception that
Call me Morgan Jeffersonian.